You are listening to the Health and Politics podcast. Prevention is the new cure.
With former ministers Steve Wright and me, Jay Bethel.
Good morning, Daddy. Why am I calling you Daddy?
Someone's been tampering with my Zoom again. It's not the worst thing that they've put up there, I must say.
I'm sure, yeah. All I'm just saying is if you're doing any other media, you might wish to change it to say Lord Bethel.
They've locked me out. I can't figure out the password.
Oh, no, no, my God. Okay, just for our listeners' benefit, this is not a pet name that I have for my co-host.
No, it really is, yeah.
Anyway, how are you, James? Sounding a bit croaky because my understanding is that you were up late last night, which we'll come on to in a minute. So just in terms of the things that we're going to talk about on this episode, I thought we would return to the under 16 social media ban, which we started talking about last week, but boy, has that picked up pace since we introduced it last week. Then let's touch on waiting times. Court of trusts in England seem to be going in the wrong direction, as reported this week. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then I thought maybe if it's okay, I might have a rant about health and care workforce vacancies in the system. And then we're going to end with a positive story. Tease that one for us.
Yes, Alzheimer's. I am very optimistic that there are cures on the horizon for brain health challenges, and we've had some exciting news on that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, right. Back to the start. House of Lords back to move last night, of which I know you were right at the centre of it, to ban under 16s in the whole of the UK from social media platforms. I am told 261 votes for the ayes, 150 for the nays. Opposition peers came together to support a ban to the government schools bill. The government say they're going to overturn it in the Commons. You were right at the heart of this last night, which I know, and it also managed to disrupt your plans somewhat. What on earth happened, Lord Bethel?
Well, just on the disruption point, if any of our listeners is thinking about having a political career, let me tell you this story. I put in the diary 6 months ago a birthday party for myself and organized for 100 of my best friends to be there. And the whole night was totally blown up by the fact that I spoke in this very, very important debate and therefore could not leave the chamber for 3 hours while the debate was going on, and was pinned to the red leather whilst all my friends drank my wine and enjoyed my hors d'oeuvres, and my wife gave a speech on my behalf. It was just a classic miserable political experience. So if you're up for that, do join politics. But if you think that sounds listen, Steve, it was a remarkable intervention. I have worked hundreds of hours on the online safety bill to try to create an environment where tech and social media and AI is clearly and thoughtfully regulated by Ofcom. But there's such a powerful feeling that those efforts have not worked out well. And this under 16 social media ban is a blunt tool, but people have reached for it big time. And they are partly inspired by the under 18 pornography age verification, which has worked a lot better than people predicted and basically has dramatically reduced the amount of filth that young people are seeing every day. And secondly, the Australia ban, which has worked on several levels. It's been a really clear message to the tech sector that they need to get serious. It's also worked very well for the Australian government that's had a pick up in the polls. So the politicians are looking at that. Now, the current government had ruled out all of these kinds of interventions. It had ruled out bringing in mandatory phones-free schools, despite the support of unions for that measure. And it had ruled out under 16 social media ban. But the House of Lords put in Lords Nash, Berger, Benjamin, and Carr, brought in an amendment just like the Australian one. And the feeling is that this may not be exactly the right amendment. We're not thinking about bringing in legislation and regulations based on this, but it is a clear message to the Commons and to the government that something needs to be done. And the government tried to brush it off with a consultation announcement on Tuesday, but that actually had quite an electric effect because peers aren't, they can see that that's a brushing off exercise and felt a bit electric that they were being treated in that fashion. So yeah, it was a big vote last night. I mean, it's an extraordinary move.
And so, as in classic parliamentary terms, the ball back now in the government's court. And I agree with you on consultation. I mean, we talked about it last week. Then the government came out with this consultation after pressure of some 60 Labour MPs had signed a motion on it, Kemi Badenoch, as we mentioned, and all of you down in the House of Lords. And when governments launch a consultation, sometimes, let's just consider this, right? In their defense, it's because they want to do the 12-week statutory consultation to make sure that legal challenge is ruled out, to make sure they've done everything properly. And you could make the argument that that's what they're doing here. But as what you say is right, that it seems to supercharge the debate. I was actually picked up on our discussion last week by somebody in Waitrose last weekend who
Oh yeah,
said, I really enjoyed your discussion about social media, but James was talking about one thing and you were talking about the other. And I think that I think she actually had a point because you were talking about social media ban. I sort of took it into the wider phone ban versus
yeah,
just social media. But that said, the consultation that the government are going to launch is going to look at schools and phones as a thing. So I think it is a wider issue, but just
it is.
focusing in on social media itself. New stat I saw this week said that teenage boys now spend more time on a screen each day than they do at school.
Yeah,
So, if you look at the little ones next time you're in an airport, next time you're on a train, and see that they are given the screen as a pacifier, in effect. So, the question that I've got for you, I understand you say it's not perfect, but how would it work in practice? If you think about social media and children as a very fast flowing river with all those social media channels flowing at young people, who's going to build the dam? And how will it work? And what's to stop children just creating an offshoot to the river that brings that social media around to them via another way that may be called a VPN?
yeah. Well, listen, the practicalities are the tech companies know how to do this in a heartbeat. They have these systems already in place. They know who is looking at every single screen. They've got tens of thousands of data points on every single user. They know the exact age of everyone who is engaged in every single phone. There's no doubt about that. So the idea that they would struggle to know the age of the person who they're dealing with is not true. And we found that with pornography. So we were told that porn age verification was unworkable. Actually, it works very well indeed. So there's that precedent. Secondly, the thing that it strikes at is the idea that there must just be one internet and everyone goes about it in the same manner, that children can freely access beheadings, violence, predators, fraud, and that's just one of the risks, like walking to the bus station, is over. People are just fed up with that idea because the experience of their children of harms is very, very bad. And therefore, they want to have two internets, one that's safe for children and one that's fruity for adults. And secondly, the debate has moved on from just being about harms to two other things. One is cognitive decline. The evidence that for all of us, including the adults, that this 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day on the phone is actually interrupting our processing power and our ability to calculate and to analyze and to pay attention. And that is very bad for children when they're meant to be learning how to be adults and their brains are actually in development. And secondly, the sheer quantity of screen time is displacing things that they should be doing, like homework, socializing, climbing trees, having fun, doing physical activity.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things they were actually explicitly excluded from the online safety process. Ofcom don't really engage on screen time and cognitive decline. But if you look at the OBR and our projections for how productive our workforce is going to be, we're losing PISA score points every year at the moment. And a lot of people speculate that that's because of the phone addiction. And in terms of the development of our children, if they're spending 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day on their phones, they're ending up extremely fragile, not engaged with each other, and very, very vulnerable on their mental health.
Just finally on this, to some of the things that Keir Starmer et al. Were saying in opposition when they said they didn't support this.
Yeah,
So, he said that he wanted to focus on controlling the content, not just the access. So,
yeah,
he expressed the preference for controlling exactly what people see rather than the blanket ban. He talked about unintended consequences. So, pushing harm underground,
yeah,
would it navigate children to less regulated, more dangerous parts of the internet? And then I think he also talked about the positive aspects. So, some of the social media positive benefits for children, such as the connection that they get, the sense of belonging that they get. I'm just playing the devil's advocate argument here. how much of that do you think the government, and who I appreciate are not adverse to a U-turn, how much do you think, though, when it comes back to the Commons, when they're presumably going to try and overturn this amendment that you passed last night, will they roll out these arguments and they'll come up, they'll do the consultation, they'll come out with something which will be kind of neither this way nor the other, and it will displease everyone? Is that where it ends?
So very good point. So I think all of those arguments have definitely got a point, and they were definitely preeminent in the Prime Minister's thinking before he got into office. But the one you didn't include was the views of parents. And what has been a really big game changer, both morally, sentimentally, and politically, is that we just weren't listening to voters and parents and their concerns about their own children. And through the various campaigns that have really become very vocal in the last year, that has got through to the political strategists. And they're now realizing, my goodness, this is a proper doorstep intifada issue. Backbench MPs, and you mentioned the 40 that wrote a letter, are
60.
telling me
60 of them.
60 are saying that we do not want to go into the next election having told parents that they're wrong. We do not want to be the people. And 173,000 parents wrote to their MPs on Friday of last week through the Phones Free Childhood organization, of which I am an advisor. That's a hell of a number. I mean, that's quite unusual. And all to their constituent MP. So the dynamics of this conversation really have changed from being a sort of patronizing, top-down, politicians tell parents how to run their lives, to parents looking like they're going to go into the next elections potentially seriously pissed off that politicians haven't protected their children.
I just wonder, James, if there's an inconsistency here, isn't there, though? Just last month, the Prime Minister launched, albeit painful, his TikTok channel, and
Yeah,
presumably because he believes that it's a useful channel to talk to young people. At the same time, this is the government that's about to lower the voting age to 16.
I know.
So, which is it? Where is the engagement? Presumably, TikTok would be part of this ban, as it is in Australia, which ministers say they're going to visit as part of this consultation to have a jolly good time down under and look at this. So, which is it? Is that an inconsistency?
It is an inconsistency. Hey, listen, I use social media. We're doing a podcast after all. I mean, I value enormously the connection. I think that the strong indication we're getting from clinicians and educators is that under the age of 16, you're just not ready for the potent algorithms and content that's on there. So that doesn't work. I agree with you, though, Steve. It does raise a question about whether people who are 16 should be eligible to vote. This has really woken up my understanding of the big difference between children and adults. Their brains are not ready. They're emotionally not mature enough to be handling things. And by the way, don't particularly want that kind of pressure typically. The polling from More in Common is very, very powerful on this. I think that voting at 16 vote is suddenly looking much more vulnerable to me than it might have done 6 months ago.
I agree. There is an inconsistency there. So, ball back in government's court. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because they'll say, look, we're not going to make law by amendment. We're going to have a proper consultation, do it all the proper way. But, that wasn't how they liked to roll when they were in opposition. And
I know.
now the ball is on the other foot, as it were. So it'll be interesting to see where this one lands. But well done to you. You sound a bit croaky. So I know you did the king's work last night, didn't you? Next up, James, we're going to talk about waiting times and whether the government are in the right place on that after we take a quick break. Right. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, welcome back. Sorry. Yeah, welcome back. Nearly a quarter of hospitals in England, James, have seen waiting times worsen since the government published its 10-year plan to tackle the backlog a year ago. So hitting the 18-week target, as we know, for treatments on knee and hip ops was a key manifesto pledge for the government. Prime Minister has put all his chips on that being the retail element that he wants to move the dial on when it comes to health. So nationally, progress is being made, and I've been one of the first to acknowledge that. But 31 hospital trusts have gone backwards. Another 17 have made little progress. Of the 129 trusts at the BBC, Nick Triggle, who's the excellent health correspondent at the BBC, did this piece of work. So hospitals are struggling, and it's an inconsistent picture. The question that I put to us, is tackling the elective backlog. Is that the right thing that the government have stuck its chips on?
Well, you're slightly triggering my pet obsession subject, which I'll skip over as quickly as I can. they should be measuring outcomes. They should be measuring the underlying health of the nation, not the inputs, the number of hip operations. But we should definitely have that conversation another time. Given we are where we are, which is that the government has made some heroic projections about what it can do to simply optimize the system as it exists by managerially pushing harder and being more thoughtful and energetic and not being useless Tories. Uh, I do think these numbers are very, very disappointing. I attended a ton of seminars at the King's Fund and round tables and all sorts of management consultancy events at which it was described to me that if only you applied grip and thoughtfulness and presentations and Blairite type energy to the system, you could actually squeeze out 20, 30% more productivity. I mean, these are bright people who I have respect for. So I jogged along, but I was always a little bit skeptical. These numbers make me suspect that it's not as easy as that, and that actually an unreformed system is just not going to deliver what they had hoped. And we are also getting this secondary effect in A&E that a number of people warned about in advance, that if resources are focused on elective recovery, what's going to happen on the front line of the hospital in A&E? And Steve, I think you've had some recent experience there.
Yeah, I'm not dodging it. I'll come back to that in just a second. I mean, I think what happens in opposition is that governments believe that they can get in and a health secretary will be there at DH and the NHS is a homogenous body and you can make change across the NHS because we've got to
Right.
fix the broken NHS as if it were one thing. And I've often said this, maybe controversially, the NHS doesn't exist.
No.
It's a fantastic brand. It's a fantastic logo, but of course, there is no such thing as a national health service. It's not one homogenous body. It's made up of hundreds of separate organisations.
Yep.
Each have got their own distinct financial, operational challenges. And that means that tackling the care backlogs are going to be more difficult in some parts of the country than they are in others, particularly if you've got entrenched challenges such as high levels of local deprivation or workforce shortages, which we're going to come on and talk about in a bit. And that really is the nub of this. And if you go to the BBC website, you will see it says put in your postcode and see what it's like where you are. And it's vastly, vastly different. On A&E, and this is the key point. I mean, I did have cause to spend some time with someone in the in an accident and emergency department earlier this week. We spent 8 hours in there,
Mm.
and mostly that was sitting on chairs. And at times, people would go and sort of sit or lay on the floor in the corridor just to break the monotony of sitting on the hard chairs. There's very little access to refreshments. There's just water. And somebody said to me, gosh, we feel worse when we left here than when we
Mm.
came here. And you're right, the resources are being channeled into meeting this 18-week target, which is the Prime Minister's big thing, and it's the government's big political promise. But that comes at a cost of what's happening in A&E. Now, what the answer to that is a real massive question, isn't it? The Liberal Democrats say we'll cancel the Trump medicines deal and put that money straight into fixing A&E. If only it were that simple. But I just wonder, we talk about health and politics on here, don't we? I just wonder whether it's not the elective waiting list that people are complaining to their MPs about. It's going to A&E and waiting 8, 10, 12. I saw somebody on the media the other day talking on BBC Breakfast who'd been waiting 30 hours. I wonder whether that's where the retail offer is going wrong, and that's what could bite ministers come the next election.
Do you think that Wes Streeting is right to say that the NHS is in recovery? I'm just looking at BBC that he's being interviewed at the moment.
Yeah, I was watching it just before we came on. I was waiting for you. He's doing a series of the local media rounders. We used to remember doing that. You
Yeah,
sit there
yeah,
with your headphones on, and they
I
connect you
know.
to each BBC local radio station one after the
I
other.
used to
And I
enjoy it. I like
saw,
that. Yeah,
I quite enjoyed them. Yeah,
yeah,
and he was talking to Radio Sussex and Surrey, and to Cornwall, um, and to Oxfordshire, and I watched him do those, and lots of local little things came up,
yeah.
like the individual GP surgery in Didcot, but mostly, yeah, it was the big stuff, and it was about A&E weights. And he did keep saying, look, we've turned the corner. The
Yeah.
NHS is in recovery. Now, look, I'd say that if I were him, but I think if you're in an area where the figures look good, your GP access is good, or your access to a GP walk-in centre is good, and you go to A&E and you don't wait 30 hours, yeah, you probably do feel like the NHS has turned the corner. If you're in an area where one or more of those things don't add up, I think you probably think, what a load of old
Mm.
poppycock. And that's the challenge. That's why we say, it's a national health service in name, not in practice. So it really, really difficult for him. I'll tell you one thing. I wonder whether the social media clippers will have spotted this, is that he was interviewed by BBC Radio Sussex, and the presenter gave him quite a hard time on a number of issues, and it was quite a defensive interview. When it came to the end of the interview, um, they said thanks very much for joining us, Secretary of State, and he waited for the next one to come on. He rolled his eyes. The temerity of
Yeah.
being challenged, and I saw it, so I'm sure that
Mm.
the BBC watchers spotted it, and I just wonder if that'll pop up on social media today.
Yeah.
Beware the media round.
I know. Beware the hot mic as well. I know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, as if this is not just thrown together, James, I
Yeah.
thought we might talk about health and care workforce.
Yeah.
Look, here's Steve's rant of Thursday. So, look, the NHS, biggest employer in the country, one of the biggest employers in the world. Non-UK nationals make up a huge part of the NHS workforce. It's about 21% at the moment. It's risen in recent years,
Yeah.
and they're from all over the world. Asian EU countries probably the biggest. Yet we've got a vacancy rate, NHS England say, as of late to 2025, 100,000 vacancies. About 25,000 of them are in nursing. Adult social care sector, vacancy rate significantly higher, about 7%. You've got about 111, 112,000 vacant roles. So the care sector say it's a jobs crisis. It's driven by recruitment and retention challenges. So international staff account for a huge share and a growing share of the social care workforce. And about 1 in 4 of them are international. So there's a problem. At the same time, the health and care worker visa, so sort of subcategory, if you like, of the skilled worker
Mm.
visa, designed to make it easier for people to come into the country, lower fees, faster processing, exemption from the health and care surcharge, that has been vastly cut back. So from April 25, during this government's tenure, employers recruiting from overseas got to first demonstrate attempts to recruit UK workers, and perhaps fair enough if the reality today matched it. And then the last government closed the health and care visa route to new sponsorship for care workers from July 25, which this government kept in place. And at the same time, as if that weren't enough, care workers, senior care workers, are no longer allowed to bring dependents as part of a healthcare visa to come into the country. So we're talking about wait times. We're talking about A&E waits. We're talking about the challenges of the elective backlog. We have a 10-year workforce plan that is coming out at some point this year,
I
presumably
know.
by the summer, but we're closing the door. Now, I think we take a slightly different view on this, maybe in the longer term, but we have a problem here, Houston, don't we?
Yeah. We massively do. And we desperately need to have this conversation. And you are right to point to the difficult politics around immigration and the quite arbitrary and quite uh, hard-hitting restraint suddenly put on health and care immigration. I think where I would just chip in a bit on this is when I travel around the world, every single country has got this problem. There is a global lack of health and care workers. Even in the Philippines, which traditionally we thought of as being a source for health and care workers, there's very good hospitals that have got vacancies, and people who are qualified in the Philippines are being offered brilliant salaries to stay in their home country. And there used to be jets full of nurses leaving places like Mumbai for the UK to fill our empty spots and agencies. But those jets are empty now. People are going either to the Gulf or to other richer nations or staying in newly prosperous India. So the idea that we've got some kind of get out of jail card for our own domestic workforce problems through immigration, particularly of cheaper social care workers, is just no longer true. I'm just being pragmatic about this, ideology aside. And we need to tackle that point. We need to ask ourselves the question, why have we become so addicted to cheap imported social care? And why can't we fill our own technical, clinical positions with British graduates in nursing and in doctoring? In fact, quite a lot of British doctors are having to leave the UK and go to places like Australia because they can't get jobs here in the UK.
Hmm.
So there is something deeply askew in all of this. And some of the answers to the questions, I'm not trying to make the argument now, is we do need to think a little bit about what we expect from families to look after their own kin, from communities to create environments where older people can live healthy, engaged, positive lives, and the way in which we do community health that means that clinical interventions aren't the default for every single need in health, so that a broader range of professional healthcare workers can be involved in care.
I hear you. I'm not saying that we should have a race to the bottom and just import cheap labor, cheap slave labor to work in the care sector, for instance. Minimum salary thresholds now for
Yeah,
skilled roles in health and care. So I think it's about £25,000, which is no small feat for some care providers, and a lot of care workers would love to earn 25k, I'm sure. But my point is that we have a short-term problem now, and I gave you the vacancy
yeah,
figures. Longer term, yes, of course, you want to train domestic people in order to do those jobs, but A, do they want to do it? Do they actually want to do that work? You
yeah.
speak to your teenagers, is the care profession where they want to go? It certainly isn't what mine say. So there's a short-term problem right now. And I guess really the reason for this rant is obviously we talk health and politics, and let's just focus on the politics bit. So last week, obviously, you saw Nadeem Zahawi and then the big Robert Jenrick news,
Yeah,
the defecting to reform. The whole drift of public debate, the broader reform of UK immigration policy, is about lowering net migration across all the
yeah,
parties, with the exception of the Green Party, I'll grant you. So the pressure is only downwards in this area of both the government, Labour, and the opposition, Conservative, chase reform. So the debate is only going in one direction. Meanwhile, all the figures that I gave about vacancies remain the case. So the government promised this 10-year workforce plan, but boy, is that the devil's own job. Because I just don't see, given that it takes 7 years to train a doctor, I just don't see the trajectory for getting the homegrown workforce to fill the gap anytime soon. And given that workforce is always the constraint of the NHS performing where it wants to perform in
yeah.
the backlogs in A&E, then surely going back to our turning the corner problem, we may have turned one corner, but surely we're only going round another cul-de-sac.
The short-term problem. I mean, listen, your points are all correct, and you didn't mention demographics. A greater proportion of our country is older every year at the moment because of the nature of the bubble that we have. But Steve, we've got 1.7 million people working in social care at the moment. What's the solution? We should have 2 million people working in social care in a few years' time. I'm not sure if that is the answer either. I went to Japan and Taiwan for Christmas, countries that have almost no immigration at all. So they have it is absolutely extraordinary. It's completely undiverse when you walk down the streets.
Mm.
And my own family in Taiwan have older relatives, and there is almost no available social care or nursing workforce to look after them. Like, you could phone the agencies night and day, and they'll say, we just don't have anyone to bring in. So we have to think as a family about how we keep them healthy so that they can look
Yeah.
after themselves, and how, as a family, we provide their care for ourselves. And I'm not trying to be romantic or make ludicrous points. I'm just saying that the conversation is not limited to, right, how do we find 300,000 more people to look
It's a
after?
richer conversation. And
It's
Jeremy
got to,
Hunt, as
yeah,
health secretary, used to talk all the time about families being part of the care answer. But of course, that isn't an option for everybody. They may be constrained by where they live. They may be constrained by the relationships. So it's an incredibly difficult conundrum. But I just think a lot of these MPs who are calling for, I used to say this when I chaired the select committee, so I'm being consistent, I think, calling for a driving down of the net immigration figures. But when constituents come to them and say, mum's in the care home and we're having to do the personal care when we go in and visit,
yeah.
there is a connection between the two things, guys.
Uh,
That's the point that I'm making. Anyway,
and,
just
and just to chip in, I do have huge personal sympathy for unpaid carers who carry huge burdens
huge
sometimes
burn.
looking after either older or vulnerable people, and get very little support from the state or from their communities, and that's a huge burden carried by them, and
Yeah.
that should be recognised.
Just before we close with our positive story,
Hmm.
one of my is a music test for you, James. Casey Lowry. Are you
Ooh,
familiar with Casey Lowry's work?
no,
Well,
is it
so
country and
Casey
western?
Lowry has 3.8 million followers on TikTok and 1.3 million on Instagram through his music. And he has come out in support of your ban for under 16s accessing
There
social
we
media
go. It
platforms.
sounds great.
And, we were talking last week, weren't we, about Jessie from Little Mix and how, I saw this week actually she had met with the health secretary and he's made some very, very positive noises about wanting to go further and faster in that area. I digress. But Casey Lowry has backed up this campaign around the under 16 social media ban. And, that just catches the attention, doesn't it? And if he's saying that,
Mm.
then, I think the government should ban it. I don't think there are any problems in doing so. There are huge pros of social media. Young people are able to learn on social media. They're more connected, but the negatives are crazy, especially for a young brain. It's so addictive. So there you go. From the
Well,
mouth
well,
of
Steve,
Casey Lowry.
I've been invited by the Secretary of State, Wes Streeting, to a meeting with him and Jonathan Haidt. And there's one guy who can smell the political winds, and that's our health secretary. And if he thinks
Good
that,
point.
and if he thinks doing an event with parliamentarians with Jonathan Haidt is a good idea, then I think that's probably where the winds are blowing for sure.
Very good point. Maybe young Casey should come along to
Yeah,
your
yeah,
event.
definitely.
Final story. An international trial is examining whether finger prick blood tests could be used to help diagnose Alzheimer's. It involves 1,000 volunteers over 60 in the UK, US, and Canada, aims to detect biomarkers associated with the condition. It's called the BioHermes 002 study. It's led by a medical research charity called LifeArc and the Global Alzheimer's Platform Foundation with support from the UK Dementia Research Institute. And we just spotted this, didn't we, this week and thought, wow,
Yeah,
another interesting bioscience game changer.
absolutely. Well, hats off to the UK Dementia Research Institute. It's not very well known, but I happen to know the crew there, and they are doing terrific work. I tell you why I'm excited about this. Creating a new test for Alzheimer's is difficult, but it's not in itself a remarkable medical advance. What this is a marker of itself is a growing confidence that early interventions for Alzheimer's are on the horizon. There's no
Mm.
point designing a test unless, if you find that someone's positive, there's a pathway and a treatment for what you have discovered. And clearly, a lot of people think that that's going to happen very, very soon. And so they're preparing for that moment by designing good tests, reliable tests, so that if you do score a positive, you can then go on and be treated. And for me, that's a really big vote of confidence. Steve, we've got a huge dementia challenge on the horizon with our aging population. It remains one of the knottiest medical problems. The treatments for dementias are really tough, not very effective, and have huge side effects. Wouldn't it be amazing if there were breakthroughs? I know we're not meant to use the word breakthrough, but really, if there were breakthroughs that meant that those who are heading for Parkinson's, vascular, Alzheimer's, all of those, which will be, I don't know, a quarter, a third of the population, could actually get a test like that, see that they're heading for trouble, and then use a mixture of holistic interventions, improving their diet, their exercise, their mental health, and medical interventions with the new drugs, and actually lead longer, better lives in good mental health. I mean, that'd be just fantastic, wouldn't it?
And particularly in dementia, some of the drugs that are donanemab that are now coming
Yeah,
online, obviously the earlier they're taken, the further you fall, the harder it is, of course, to treat. And the earlier you catch, the better
yeah.
it is. Hence, prevention is the new cure, as somebody once said.
There we go. Someone
Mm.
should.
Anyway, that wraps for this week. Just a bit of an advert for next week, James. We're hoping to hear on the podcast next week from the CEO of the Stroke Association because it's Stroke Prevention Day next week, the day that we put out our podcast. So we're hoping to just get a word from Juliet about that, which will be really interesting because that affects a lot of people, and hopefully we can bring some light to that one. But that's us. You can get us.
Fantastic.
Prevention is the new cure at prevention is the new cure podcast at gmail.com. That is our email address. Let's get it right. And you can find us on all the usual social media channels where you can interact, tell us what you thought, or you can just find me in Waitrose.
Fantastic. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, she'll
Thank
reach
you
the
to that
pages.
lady.
You
Thank you to that
bet.
lady who found me in the frozen chips aisle.
Yeah, there we go.
Appreciated it. James, pleasure to see you. Keep up the good work.
Fantastic, Steve. See you next week. Take care. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
God bless. Bye.